The history of Christ's church in the first century unfolds on the pages of the New Testament, and it gives you two different impressions. On the one hand, you have the seemingly endless battle against heresy and ethical challenges that we read about in Paul's letters. But on the other hand, to open the book of Acts is to light a fire under your passion for the church. From 12 scared guys hiding in a room, the Holy Spirit rains down and transforms them into world changers, people that the story says turned the world upside down. When a lot of us compare our experience with the church today to what we read in that book, we often find a longing to have that experience for our own. But is what we read in the Acts of the Apostles normative? And is what Dr. Luke records descriptive or prescriptive? Let's look into that today. The book of Acts falls into the genre of historical narrative. It's written as the second part of Luke's report to Theophilus, and it records the expansion of the first century church through the ministry of the apostles. Along with the narrative sections in the Gospels, these are the only examples of this genre in the New Testament. In a previous episode of Walk the Walk, I talked about the lens through which history in the Bible is to be read. We need to be aware of the three levels of story that we're going to encounter. At the lowest level of story, we'll see the individual histories, such as the things we read about Peter and Paul and Stephen in Acts. At a second level, those individual stories contribute to a larger story of God's covenant people. Here in the New Testament, we're most interested in what's going on with God's people of the new covenant, what we refer to as the church. Finally, at the top level of story is meta-narrative. That's God's overarching plan of redemption and the way in which it's being worked out. From the bottom up, the individual stories and histories contribute to the mid-level, the story of Christ's church, which in turn has a role in God's plan for redemption spelled out in that meta-narrative. If this sounds like something interesting to you, other Christians might find it interesting as well. So would you give this video a like so that more people can have a chance to see it? I posed the question a moment ago about the book of Acts being normative for the life in the church. Before we look for that answer, let's be clear about the difference between authoritative and normative. The Bible itself is authoritative, that is, inerrant and infallible, and it's authoritative because it is the living Word of God for all people, for all time. What the Bible establishes as truth is truth. For something to be normative, that means that it determines the norms. It determines the way things are to be. And it's here that we need to bring our best discipleship to bear and ask the question, does what the Bible says about something in the first century apply to us in the 21st century? And I mean that question universally. To be more specific, when the Bible describes the way that the church was and did things in the first century, does that apply automatically to God's people in the 21st century who are living in a vastly different culture? There is a strong belief that runs through the present-day church that views Acts with a restorationist perspective. That is, people look back to the church experience in the first century as setting all the norms to be followed in our time. Read in a certain way, Acts can be seen to establish an ideal for the church, but it brings up a new question. If the church experience in Acts is to be the norm, to be followed for all time by all people, then why do we see such differences with regard to the practices that we see in the book of Acts? Modern Christians in churches the world over differ on things like paedobaptism, on when to observe the Lord's table and how often, on choosing deacons by congregational vote, and even ritual snake handling. A careful hermeneutic is needed to resolve where we land on this question. I'll state the question at hand differently. In what ways do the narratives in Acts or the Gospels function as precedents for our church today? That's if they do at all. Does what we read as having happened mean that the same practice in the same fashion must or should happen today? Our hermeneutic for addressing this question should enable us to say either we must do this or we may do this. An important assumption that should be brought to our reading is this: unless the Bible explicitly tells us that we must do something, the things that are described do not function as normative in our lives, unless, as careful readers, there is some other reason to believe that the author intended for the text to function in that way. A good object lesson is found in chapter 6 of Acts, where 7 are chosen to fill the deacon's role. We ask of that incident, is that a prescriptive passage? And what that means is that we always have to have 7 deacons. And if that's the case, it is a prescriptive passage. How then do we justify congregational vote for this office, since these men are clearly chosen by the elders of the church? And that's just the simplest example to consider. How do you answer? A governing factor for determining whether an historical event establishes a precedent is found by recognizing the intent of the book's author. We ask of the book and what we know of the author, what is the story or the message that he's trying to communicate in writing his book? It might be didactic, or the event may be a detail necessary to tell a much bigger story. In the book of Acts, we have to read the entire book, as well as Luke's first volume, to get an idea of what his intent might be. One thing is clear: Luke is not giving a how-to manual. Instead, he's showing how the church emerged as the worldwide phenomenon that it became. The Holy Spirit plays an enormous role in both of his books, so the Spirit-empowered church of the 21st century should share the traits that we see in the first century church. We should be evangelistic. We should have community as a high value. We should be joyful. We should, maybe more than anything, show that the manifest presence of God is with us, is visible to our community. But what about the practices that we see? Are they normative? Well, once we have a good idea of the author's intent, it becomes a little bit easier to determine whether or not a recorded event was meant to be a precedent for all time. Back to the question of may we or must we, should we or could we, consider some of the things that Acts and the Gospels present us with. For example, baptism. It's clear that Christians then and now are commanded to be baptized. There's no question about that. It is indisputable. But the lack of instruction as to how to baptize, or even who to baptize, becomes a seed of division amongst the church. Notice, despite the number of baptisms that we read of, there is no express teaching about the mode of baptism, whether that baptism is to be accompanied by charismatic phenomena, whether that baptism is to be limited to a certain age. There's a lot of questions. The requirement to baptize is normative, but what about the method? To translate the Greek word baptizo, we gather the general meaning to be immersion. That is, we are emulating, joining with Jesus in dying and then rising up again. On the other hand, there is ample historical record to show that in certain regions of the Middle East where this story is going on, it wasn't possible to baptize by immersion because there was no body of water deep enough and big enough for believers to be immersed. So sprinkling or pouring over the head was the accepted method of baptism. The intent of the inspired word is that believers should be baptized, but the mode of baptism is a secondary issue, and it never was meant to divide Christians. The narrative portions of the Gospels and the book of Acts are important parts of the treasure of the New Testament. Many of the things that we are commanded to do are perfectly clear in the Scriptures. Others require a careful hermeneutic approach in order to determine must we or may we with regard to a particular practice. Finding the intent of the author is often the most important clue that we can gather in order to determine whether or not the Holy Spirit is teaching us that something must happen or that something may happen. And one last thing to remember, unless we are absolutely certain of heresy in the beliefs of another group of Christians, we must exercise caution in allowing how one group interprets these narratives to divide us. One thing the Scriptures are clear about is that we are all one body with many parts. Let's always be sure as Christians that we care for all the parts of the body. Until the next episode, God's richest blessing.